Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome from Beacon Hill to the 413. Another beautiful day here, joking around that I wish we could do today's show outside. So I'm throwing that out to you, Pete and Kenny, for the next one. Hopefully we can do that. As many of you know, the goal of this show from Beacon Hill, from the 413, is to give all of you, the at home, the public, the most important people that we serve, obviously, a look into how the state legislature and how your state government works. And it's all based on that principle. And I've said this every show, and I'm going to continue to show it. When I first got elected state representative, I had this column in the Westfield Evening News. And all I did was give a week's update from the previous week, everything I did, the events happening, the votes I took, really everything going on Beacon Hill. And still to this day, it's been the thing that I've done that I've gotten the most positive feedback, not because people agreed with my votes, not because people agreed with my policies, but because it was keeping them informed. So that really is the genesis of this show. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that since we've done this show, Beacon Hill to the 413, there's been any number of people that have stopped me and said, thank you for that and thank you for the continued updates. And really, that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the people that are helping me put this show on. Les, Kenny, Pete, the school, everybody, the students here. But most importantly, my guests. And today I have a very special guest. Today my guest is from, rewinding a little bit. In government, we always say that things are best done when work is done in collaboration. And what that means for me as an elected official is that I need to maintain relationships with the mayors in my communities, the congressmen, the congresswomen that I share districts with, the senators, everything. Government works at its best when people work together. So today, we are truly honored to have one of our partners, one of those mayors from one of the 11 cities and towns that I represent. My guest today is the great mayor of Agawam, Bill Sapelli. Welcome, Mayor.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here.
And we thank you for having you. Now, Mr. Mayor, I have to ask you, I want to begin with your background, because your background, ever since I met you, it fascinates me. Coming from the education world, but just as we were talking before, I didn't realize exactly where you started. So can you kind of take the viewers, as you know, there's going to be a lot of people that probably know this story in the district you currently represent, but the show's broader than that, and your background fascinates me, and I think it says a lot about who you are. So how'd you end up as mayor of Agawam?
How did I end up as mayor of Agawam? Some people say it was on a bet and I lost, but we won't go there. Actually, I started my career after I got out of St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire. I started as a substitute teacher and a coach, varsity hockey, assistant football, and assistant baseball at Agawam High School. So I was a high school sub and coach, and I did that for a year or two, and then I was appointed to the junior high school as a science teacher. Huh? So I was a science teacher in the junior high. So I started the high school, then I was moved to the junior high. I spent about 6-7 years there. Then I became an assistant principal at our middle school for 5 years. And after that, I went to Robinson Elementary School as their principal for 12 years. Then I was moved to the central office as the assistant superintendent for 9 years. And then I served as superintendent for 6. So I spent 45 years in the school system, and I retired from the school system. And in my last months as superintendent, I had a group of people come up to me and ask me to run for mayor. And I thought they were kidding at first. And I said, well, I'm going to retire. I don't need this. They said, I think you could help our community. You have some of the skill sets as the superintendent of schools that would flow right over into the mayor's position. You have the largest budget in town. You deal with personnel constantly. You're hiring and firing, you deal with insurance and budgets and the whole bit. So a good friend of mine, Lou Conti, said, if you run for mayor, Bill, I'll be your campaign manager. Most people know Lou. Lou's a great guy, well-known person around the whole Western Mass area, but certainly in Agawam. So
and the former athletic director, right?
Correct. And a friend from way back. We played baseball together in high school, Who and I did. But anyways, he pushed me a little bit too. So we started a campaign, and lo and behold, we won, and here I am 3 terms later, and I'm the mayor of Agawam.
How about that? So beginning as a substitute teacher and working your way up to superintendent. So you literally did almost, I would imagine, every job there is in the school system.
Yes, I started, as you said, at high school, and I also worked at the junior high. I worked at the middle school. I worked at the elementary schools, and then I worked at central office. So yes,
So did you, when you started knocking on doors to run for office, did you know everybody?
I knew a lot of people, and not to sound egotistical, but if I didn't know them, they knew me because I came across so many people
Of course.
during those 45 years in education and coaching that they knew me if I didn't know them. And I come from a family of 6 children, and we were born and brought up in Agawam. So if they didn't know me, they knew the name and they knew one of my brothers or sisters. So that helped a lot. And we did do door knocking. I can't tell you how helpful that was. I was told by people that knew what they were doing. I didn't. I never campaigned. I never thought I'd be in politics. They said, what you have to do, the most important thing is door knock. And I said, really? They said, yes. So I reluctantly, I put it off till the summer. And then I went out and started door knocking. And lo and behold, that made a huge difference. I had people say, boy, we can tell you're serious about this. You're going knocking on doors. So
It's the I'm a huge believer in door knocking. It's something I've done in all my races, and if you think about it, it makes sense. There's nothing more personal than an aspiring office holder or someone who's in office running for re-election or a different office, just kind of touching base and saying, "Hey, how are you? I wanna serve. What's on your mind?" I can't get into the number of times, as you experienced probably yourself, where you would just have someone say, I didn't know anything about you. Now I do. And sometimes even this, I didn't think that I liked your politics. But now that we've had this conversation over a glass of water, it's special. And a lot of times, and I'm sure this probably happened to you as well, you'll have people that will just say, "Hey, come on in, have a cup of coffee, have a water. You need anything to eat?" You truly see how gracious your fellow human beings are when you're knocking on doors.
without a doubt. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. Politics is an interesting occupation, and what it's all about is relationship building.
Absolutely.
And what better way to build relationships than to go and meet people in person? I'm that type of guy. Even in my office now, they laugh at me because we have stairs in my office, and it's 3 stories. So I'm always up and down the stairs. If I need somebody in the treasurer's department or the assessor or in the clerk's office, I don't pick up the phone and call their office. I run down there. So they see me all the time. So the joke is make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do because you never know when the mayor's going to pop in. So, but people like that face-to-face interaction. It means a lot to people.
I'm just thinking about this. So one of the funniest things for me was when I was knocking on doors, I'd knock on a door and it'd be a former teacher of mine or a former principal, and I'd freeze at first. It was like, uh-oh, I'm trying to think, did I do anything in this classroom when I was, and we always had such good laughs. And it's like reverse in your situation. You're the teacher, principal, superintendent knocking on a door of many former students. So I can imagine that must have made for a lot of great memories and laughs. So that's really fascinating.
It did, especially when I knocked on some doors and said, "Oh, my mother or father had you as a teacher." I got that once in a while as well, so that was interesting.
No, that's great. And what I can't even, education obviously is something that in Beacon Hill that we constantly do. It's something we need to do more, but the more funding, I think, for you and I have talked about this at length. Some of the funding formulas are flawed, is probably the best way to put it. Can always add money to an education budget. I think it's probably the most important thing that we do right now. I mean, the education of our youth, the future leaders, the future, it's we can never stop doing enough. So that perspective, and to the point you made earlier about, having done budgets, having done all these other things, obviously that served you well for a seamless transition when you were elected mayor. I would think.
Yes, without a doubt. And funding is so important. And there's a lot of grants out there, and it's interesting how these grants are set up in some cases. And in some cases, a community like Agawam, which isn't as large as some of the cities, we don't qualify for some of these grants. So we basically have to go for the competitive grants in most cases. And it's based on your demographics in many cases. All the allotments, whether it's the ARPA money or Title I money or whatever. So they look at your, the makeup of your community and the number of residents you have. And so Agawam has to fight for every dollar we get. So it's very important that we have people like you standing up for us and supporting us. You brought a lot of funding back to Agawam in the short time you've been representing our community. And we're very, very grateful for that. And it's easy. We know we can pick up the phone and call you.
Absolutely.
And you're there. And if you can't fund it, you can't fund it. You'll be right up front. You won't promise
Absolutely.
anything you can't deliver on. And that's what I respect most about you and what you do.
Well, well, you said it's a people's business, and I think part of that is it's about building relationships, and there's nothing worse in a relationship. It's a very humble, and I think it shows humility. If someone calls you up and asks for something, it's, look, I can't do it. I think where people get in trouble is they kind of string folks along saying, I might be able to do it, or I think I can, and then you can't. Honesty goes a long way in all walks of life, but certainly in this people business of politics. Throughout the course of the pandemic, obviously every level of government, I think, had different eyes and ears on the pandemic and were asked to respond very differently to the pandemic, different challenges, some of the most nuanced and complex challenges that any of us have had to deal with. For me, I have had my office, the phones have just rang nonstop with constituent issues. It could be landlord-tenant issues, unemployment issues, big issues. A lot of people found themselves not being able to work because the government told them they couldn't work because of their job. People had to pay bills. People had to buy groceries. People had to make car payments, all that stuff. So that was kind of my lens into COVID. So many different difficult issues, the back and forth between the legislature and the governor, the state of emergency, et cetera. But I've often marveled about the role of our friends in municipal government and local government like yourself. So I guess, can you just give the viewers kind of your perspective of what the past 2.5 years has been like as the mayor of a community in Massachusetts?
It was extremely interesting and certainly an eye-opening experience. And what I really came away with is how cooperative and supportive people were, and not whining and complaining, which was great. They really pulled together in my community. I can't speak for other communities, but I came in January of 18, so I had 1 year of honeymoon, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hit. So, baptism by fire. But it was very, very interesting because this pandemic, we always have our health department, for years when I was on the school side as well. They talk about the chance of a pandemic and how you would respond to that and react to that and some of the drills they had and brought certain things to your attention. But until you're in the middle of one, especially of this magnitude, which was worldwide, there's no playbook. I mean, you're making it up as you go along, and you're making decisions based on the best information you have, the data that's presented, what the Department of Public Health, DPH, and what the CDC is telling you to do. And let's face it, we made some mistakes as a country, as a state, as a city throughout this. You just hope those mistakes weren't lasting mistakes and weren't too damaging, because you are flying by the seat of your pants. You're so to speak, building a plane as you're flying it. But many, many things happened. I'll use Agawam as my reference because that's all I have. We had situations where our schools, that was a big deal. And having the school background, I could really relate to it, where we actually had to go remote like everybody did. They said we have to close the schools down. So we had to go remote. So we had to figure out how to get everybody trained, because not all the teachers were able to do remote. Not all kids and families had a computer at home. So fortunately, the federal government and the state came up with funding, so we could buy the Chromebooks. We tended to go to Chromebooks. Some people had laptops, some people had iPads. We went with Chromebooks. Yeah. And we had to train everyone, the parents as well as the students and the teachers, how to deliver lessons remotely. And that was a real challenge for a long time. And the biggest concern most educators had, and it was my biggest concern, was this lack of socialization. Yeah. Having people locked down, basically, is what we were for a good part of that time. And we were trying to do as much as we could to get outdoor activities, once they allowed things to happen outdoors, going as we could. One thing Agawam did, and other communities as well, is we pushed for and promoted outdoor dining. Because what happened to a lot of these restaurants was, first of all, they were closed down completely, as everybody was. And then it was, well, you can open, but only with 50% occupancy. Well, 50% occupancy barely pays your bills. Yeah. You may keep your head above water, you may not. By introducing outdoor dining, you had your 50% inside, and now you had 50% outside. So you were whole again. That really caught. That had a lot of traction, and that after the pandemic, or as it slowed down, we're still not done with it. But some of these restaurants said, hey, this is really working. People are enjoying it. We want to keep it.
Yeah.
So we put in a lot of different ordinances that would allow them, make it easier for them, the restaurants, to offer outdoor dining. One of the things we did, as well as other communities, but I think we were one of the first to start it, we washed and waived the liquor license fees because they were hurting enough. You know, it wasn't a huge sum. It was $1,500 for Agawam, but that's $1,500 in their pocket rather than ours. Not that it didn't hurt
At
the
a
town.
time when they need it.
Exactly. And we made the permitting very easy. We helped expedite the permitting process for them. So that was a good thing. So there were some positive things that came out of it. Getting these students back to school was one of our biggest concerns, and we were pushing constantly. We had our school committee on board with voting to go back to school as soon as we were able to. And in our community, and there was a lot of lengthy discussions on it, but we had students back May 1st of last year, which was, I think, as early or earlier than most of them. Most of them said at this late in the year, we might as well wait and start in September. We felt every day we could get kids in front of teachers was a gift.
Absolutely.
So we brought them back for that last 2 months. And I can't tell you now, after the fact, what a great decision that was. At the time, we were taking a shot. We didn't know. We had the approval of the CDC and DPH, so we went with it. So there were things we were doing, decisions we were making in conjunction with our city council and our school committee, who were very supportive, and the parents and the teachers union. We have a great teachers union. They're pretty supportive. A lot of teachers unions were pushing back. Ours were questioning, as they should have, but they were very cooperative during this whole process because they had to be back in there too. It wasn't easy for them to make that decision, and they have families at home and loved ones at home and elderly parents at home. So these were tough decisions, but as I said, we were kind of making it up as we were going along, trying to be safe, but also thinking what's in the best interest of the students and the community.
So this past weekend, in fact, I got back late last night. I was at what's widely considered, not widely considered, is the largest mental health and substance use conference in the world. It's called NatCon. It's in D.C. And there was a lot of time talked about the impact that COVID-19 has had on kids throughout America, students. I have frequently said that I feel, and I'd love your perspective on this because of your background, that obviously so many human beings have lost their lives. So many people have gotten sick. So many businesses have been, from a bottom line standpoint, irreparably harmed. But the impact, a lot of these impacts that I think are going to come to fruition at some point, they're not immediate. We've seen immediate. As you know, I just had a kid who's way too young, but I've seen it with my nephews. My sister would talk about it all the time. But the long-term social, emotional impact that COVID has had on kids and their mental health is something that I think we're going to be talking about for a long time. And I just kind of put myself just going back in the way that I am to this day. I need that human interaction. And that's one of the things that I think COVID, it was a pandemic of many things, but first and foremost, it was a pandemic of isolation. And to kind of take kids away from their classmates, their everything. So I think I think it was a courageous decision. But I couldn't agree with you more that I think it was the right decision going back to your point. Even if it was, I don't know when school ends, but even if it was mid-June, even getting them back in June for a little bit, because every day matters. So I just really, really kudos to you and the school committee and everybody else involved in that decision because it's a tough one. And as we've seen the past 2 years, everything has become politicized in many places, and there's a lot of back and forth on a lot of these issues, any number of issues. But I think that was a really good decision. So I guess my question is how's it going now in the schools? What are you seeing and what are you hearing as far as the students right now as we find them in class right now? I've spent a good amount of time in the Agawam schools. We recently had the DARE graduation, which was awesome, and then a couple other things right after that. But What are you seeing? What are you hearing from people on the ground?
I think there's a greater appreciation for the importance of socialization now that they went without it for so long.
Yeah,
And I can't thank our superintendent of schools, Sheila Hoffman,
she's
for the
great.
job she did. She came in the middle of this
Yeah.
as a new superintendent. She came in
Talk about baptism by
2
fire.
years ago. So yeah, she came in right in the middle of it, and I'll tell you, there were discussions and heated discussions about mandating masks, not mandating masks. Should we wear masks? Should we be in school? Should we be remote? Every community wrestled with it, and we were no different. And she made some tough decisions, but a lot of positives came out of it. I think the appreciation for the face-to-face contact.
Absolutely.
It's certainly not overrated. I think that was proven. I think one thing that came out of it is people's technology skills.
Absolutely.
They were improved. They had to be. If you didn't hone your technology skills as a teacher, you couldn't teach your classes because you were stuck. That was the only way you could do it. And that was a positive thing. The monies we received from both federal and state for a lot of our technology, because they knew we had to get additional software, additional devices, that helped us with our inventory. So we were shooting for one-to-one technology with each student. We were close, but not there yet. Well, with the monies we received, because it was, you had to have it, that helped. So there were a lot of positive things. One thing you mentioned earlier is what was missed, and I don't want to dwell on the negative, but some experiences with some of these students, with the bad luck of timing and how old they were.
Oh, yeah.
They missed graduations if they were seniors in the last couple of years, as we knew them. We had graduations in Agawam regardless, but it wasn't the same. They missed proms.
Yeah.
They missed a lot of the senior activities and a lot of that socialization. Some of them missed their senior year of sports. Sports was impacted, and that's what keeps some kids in school, and that's a huge piece of building character, leadership skills, playing sports, and those activities. So there was a lot that we'll never get back, but there's a lot of good that came out of it as well.
I remember both Westfield and then in Agawam. So it wasn't long after I got elected senator going over to Agawam for the high school graduation, and just the cars in the background. It was the students and their families in the cars, the tooting of the horns when their loved one got called. It was a special day, and then Westfield did it as well, and many communities did it. So it was just kind of taking a bad set of circumstances and trying to make the best of it. My hope, and this is when I'm speaking to students. In fact, I've said this at many of the graduations, is that the hope is that with everything you've gone through, things like resiliency, things like the ability to adapt. These are some skills that they may not know it when it's happening, and it's awful as they're going through it. But life can throw curveballs, and I don't have to tell any of the students that were in school as this was going through. But if they hold on to some of those lessons, as they advance in age, it could very well be one of the best things in terms of life lessons that they've had to go through. One door shuts, another door opens. But a lot of times you got to go look for that other door to open. It's just not going to open. So, obviously our students are our most precious assets. And you just said it. I mean, there were so many people, the teachers. I mean, everybody had family. Everybody had, quote unquote, skin in the game during this whole thing. Everybody. So thankfully, and I'm knocking on everything I see right now, we're moving in a direction where we can put this behind us. Some of the other things I want to talk about. So obviously that was just like you said, unprecedented. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Every government official, every person dealt with something that no one was alive during the of 1917, the Spanish flu. Unprecedented for anybody that was alive during this time. As you kind of look at, you mentioned government funds that have been out there. What are some of the things going on in Agawam right now, Feeding Hills, that are priority of yours? I always like to ask people this. If you were the king, the governor, the Senate president, the Speaker of the House, all combined, what would be the types of things that you'd like to see funded in your community?
Well, interestingly enough, we're very, very busy in Agawam. We have a lot of projects, very good-sized projects on the menu, if you will. One of the things we started a couple of years ago is an area we call Tuckahoe. property, which was Tuckahoe Turf Farm, and it's 300 acres. It's been sitting, we've owned it for 30 years at least, and we haven't really done much with it. So we started looking at if we put a solar field up there. We had some interested parties that want to put a solar field up there. So we carved out, I'm going to say 40 acres of it and dedicated it for a solar field so that we could be in a position where we would have income coming in, approximately 150,000 a year, to put toward a bond so we could develop that property for, at this point, passive recreation. There's a beautiful pond up there. There's pretty good sizes for fishing, and you could do canoeing and kayaking in it. And so we're in the process of developing that because the solar field went online last December. So those monies are starting to come in. So we're going to very shortly start designing, roads and trails into that property and develop it so people can use that for passive recreation. Down the road, we could possibly put some fields up there as time allows. That's one big project we have. We are looking at a police station right now. We presently have a police station that's in a converted 1907 elementary school.
Yeah, I've been.
And it's tired, and it wasn't designed for that in the first place. And that opened in '87, I want to say. So we've been there for a while. And I was looking at a safety complex, but I realized the cost of a safety complex, which would be a combination of fire and police, would be anywhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 million.
Wow.
So we looked at, well, what can we do? Rather than just say that's just too much money. What can we do? So there's a building in town that it just went up for sale, an old insurance building. And it's in good shape. It's not an old building. It was originally the Oaks Banquet Hall.
Okay.
So we've been looking at that. We struck a deal with the present owners, and we have a purchase and sales agreement contingent on us going through with our architect and making sure it's a sound building and it's appropriate for what we need to do with it. So we're working on purchasing that and converting it to a police station and moving our police station into a facility we can be proud of. We also are in with MSB, which is Mass State Building Authority, and that's the agency in the state of Massachusetts that funds school projects and only school projects. And we're very fortunate in this state. Other states don't have that. And they fund a minimum of 60%, sometimes greater, depending on your demographics and your need. Well, we were invited in a year ago. It's technically from start to finish a 6 to 7 year process from when you get invited in. And it's a long process where they evaluate you, they come out with their architects, and we're in a process of looking at that presently. And if we get approved for a new high school, what they will do is they will tell us, based on their evaluation, whether we need a new school, whether we need a renovation to the school, or whether we need an addition to the school. So we're waiting to hear on that, and we're probably about 6 months to a year away from them coming back with their determination on what they determine should be the best approach for Agawam.
What's your hope?
I'm hoping that we do get a new high school. We have probably the oldest high school in the area now that everyone around us has received a school. We have a school that was built in 1955. Other than Commerce High School in Springfield, I think Putnam's new now, Classical's new now at Central. They're newer than 1955. West Springfield, Long Meadow, East Long Meadow's in the process of the MSBA process as well, but even their existing high school is newer than our high school. So there's a lot of needs. When you think about it, back in 55, they certainly didn't have the technology they have today. They barely had television, to be honest with you. So the wiring, there's a lot of challenges to the building. So that's a huge project. And what we're looking at is to be fiscally responsible because, if people are listening, they're saying, well, you're going to get a new school, you're going to develop Tuckahoe, you're going to get a new police station. What's that going to cost? How's that going to impact taxes? So we're looking at that very carefully. And we have a plan, and we're working closely with the city council, who is also fiscally responsible and wants to take a close look at that in our school committee. So we're working as a team. And one thing I can say in the time that I've been mayor is our city council and our school committee have worked very, very cooperatively with the mayor's office. They don't rubber stamp everything. They question things appropriately. As the old expression goes, if two people always agree, one of them isn't thinking. So they do push back at times appropriately.
That. I like that.
So we have a good relationship. We have a lot of stuff going on, and that's only a few things. We still have all the infrastructure needs, the stormwater needs, the roads, the sidewalks, the intersections, the signaling. We have a lot going on.
One of the things you said, I just want to bring up, and it's funny you say that because we were talking about it this this weekend at that conference. There was lawmakers from all over the country, and we got into schools. And you just said in passing about the MSBA how in Massachusetts we are very fortunate. When I was talking about the MSBA and the role that they play and the funding mechanism that they provide, a lot of fellow lawmakers from across the country were taken aback that we actually have a state agency that does that. And I think that's really important to remember, because a lot of times I'll have conversations with folks where the MSBA sometimes is on the receiving end of a lot of
Negativity.
Thank you, Mister. Thank you.
I'm trying to be polite here.
And it's I get it, but at the same time, it's important to remember that if you think about it, in other places in this country, virtually all places in this country, the municipalities really are responsible for the entire project.
Right.
So it's something we're fortunate about.
And when you think about the funding for a facility of the size that Agawam would need based on their population, we're talking building upwards of 140 million.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, West Springfield, which is a similar sized community, 8 years ago, their school was 110 million. Now, unfortunately, as we all know, if you've done any kind of work on your home, exponentially, the prices per square foot went through the roof.
Absolutely. So this next topic is something that you and I both have had conversations about, and I think it irks us both similarly. And there's no one, I don't think there's anyone to blame. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm talking about housing. And one of the issues that we have in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's not, and just to be very clear here, as the viewers now I think know, I represent 11 cities and towns, and I've heard it from everyone. We had a meeting not too long ago about it as it relates to Agawam. And there's a lot of inefficiencies in government, and I'm trying to be polite now. And there's a lot of viewers right now laughing at my choice of words, and they'd probably be a little stronger, as would I. But one of the things that's happening, and I just had another community reach out about this, is that you have senior housing, you have government housing, and someone moves out. They may pass away, they may, whatever, they're no longer there. And that apartment stays vacant for an excessive amount of time. We talked about examples of multiple months. Another community just reached out to me, or it was pushing a year. And I'm going to speak for myself on this and, of course, give you an opportunity, but the need is so profound right now for housing, particularly senior housing, but across the board housing. And when you have vacancies for that long, something is wrong with the system. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know, because it was the meeting with you that led to this. One of the things that we're doing is, obviously, as you know, we're waiting for some data. I want to know the average of how long people are having to wait. But I'm bringing together all of my communities that want to meet, and I'm saying, give me the average wait time. And then I'm going to bring in the state and say, please tell me why this is the average wait time, and why this person, this woman who can't afford where she is, doesn't have the family support, whatever, the fact that they need to move in somewhere, why they can't move in the day after it's vacant or a week after. Talk to me about your frustration with that, because it's,
As you know, I called you and you came right away. You came over and within a week, and we discussed the issues. And I had with us the housing director for Agawam. And the whole process to me is skewed. And I know there are past incidents that led to them changing the formatting and the selection process. But let me give you an example for the audience. You know it because we've discussed it at length. But if you are looking for housing, affordable housing in the state, you can put your name on any list. We could have people literally from the Cape or from anywhere out east put their name on the list for Agawam housing. And how much sense does that make when we should look at our areas? You can't say we're just Agawam people, because some communities aren't big enough to have their own housing and they don't have a state facility or federal facility. So I get that. But how about limiting to the different areas, Central Mass, Western Mass, and Eastern Mass and limit it to that. I talk to people who call me constantly and say, Mayor, I want to get into housing. I need to downsize, or I can't afford to stay in my house. I'm elderly now. And my heart goes out to them because they are candidates without a doubt, and they qualify. But I have to tell them, I can't help you. I don't have anything to do with the placements. I don't have anything to do with the list. They say, well, I put my name on a list, but when I call the state, I can't even find out what number I am. And they can't. I mean, you know all this.
It's inexcusable.
So the list itself is a problem. The availability is there in some cases, as you pointed out, and I pointed out to you. We have reports from some of the residences that the residents that have friends or relatives or neighbors that want housing, and they'll come to me and say, the apartment next to me has been vacant for 6 months.
Yeah,
and I'll call on it, and they'll admit it. The director will say, I know, and I tell them that, and I tell them that, and I tell them that. It's not as if they're painting it or fixing it or doing the pipes over
vacant.
it. It's just vacant because it's the whole process. It's the red tape. It's bureaucracy, and we have to try to fix that somehow.
And you know what's interesting about that is that much of it. So to your point about in Massachusetts right now, we could apply. Someone in Agawam, in Westfield, in West Springfield could apply and check a button on the computer when they're doing the application to affordable housing in Cape Cod and in Brockton, et cetera. And one of the problems, as I understand it, is that in and of itself causes a little of the backup, because a lot of times people, and we have this conversation all the time as it relates to the soldiers' homes. It's, the Holyoke Soldiers' Home, the overwhelming majority of people that are at that home are from the greater Hampden County area. Same thing with Chelsea. And there's a reason for that. Most people want to live where their support network is. They want to stay home as long as they can, and when they go into some other type of housing, they want it to be around their support network. And so this idea that someone is going to go in, we'll say Brockton, I'm just picking a community, and that Agawam or Westfield is going to be a viable destination. Now, it very well could be, and there are instances of it being, but the way the system is set up right now, and this is where the director made a really good point, if that is the case, if that person in Brockton or Easton was willing to move to Agawam, Westfield, West Springfield, fill in the blanks, there should be a separate, on the computer, like a separate screen where a separate button that you have to press and say, I, in fact, will move to these communities all over. In other words, the default right now when you apply is that you're going to get it anywhere in the state. And a lot of times the red tape becomes that, Mike Smith will get a place, there's an apartment available in Agawam. Well, Mike Smith's not going to move to Agawam, but there's a process involved of contacting Mike Smith, and for Mike Smith to say, no, I'm not interested. And there's a certain time periods attached to those time periods. So there's got to be a better way that I'm sure technology would allow us to do, that when you apply for this, try to ferret out folks who truly would go Commonwealth-wide versus those from who would just stay in their area, because that, my understanding, based on our conversation with the Housing Authority, is that in and of itself would speed up this process. And if it makes it a vacancy from a year to 3 months, that's still awful, but you want to know what? Someone's going to get in there, and they're faster. That is a perfect example, I think, of some of the, sometimes, sometimes it's okay for government just to get out of the way and just let things kind of take their natural course.
In that case, it's simply, as you point out, it's a software issue. It's
a software.
It's a simple fix. People go in and it says, which facility would you like? And it has a button, all. Now, they're not thinking, they think all means, well, they know where I live out east, so it's probably going to be all the ones out east. No, that's the state.
The entire Commonwealth.
And so that button should be removed. There should be a separate queuing for them to state, are you willing to go anywhere in the state? And then,
or like your mile radius. What mile radius would
Exactly.
you go to?
That would help immensely.
Yeah, and that to me, so that's another issue. So ARPA, we've got, and you've kind of touched on this with some of the infrastructure stuff. There's going to be some unique opportunities coming up. One, obviously, the federal government passed an infrastructure bill. Conversations happening right now about best ways to utilize that money. And then we in the Commonwealth have an additional $2.4 billion that we are going to be, at some point in the next year, I'd say, probably less, doing another ARPA bill. For the viewers, just again, the American Rescue Plan Act money. It was I think, one of the best bills passed in a long time at the federal level, because they just don't seem to do much of anything these days. But it actually is having a real impact in the states and at the local governments. Obviously, and this is my job, going to be fighting for a lot of that for the communities that I represent. Obviously, Agawam being one of them. But what would be, and I think you kind of already answered this, but do you have an ARPA wish list, if you will? Things that you're looking for. I know we talked about a lot of projects. Anything in the a strategic vision, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, anything in the next year or so, that if that money were brought to you, if we were able to get some of that, what would be the first thing on your wish list?
We have stormwater issues like everybody does.
Yeah.
Since that Clean Water Act was passed by the federal government, I'm going to say 3 years ago now in July, it had a lot of different requirements that communities have to fulfill. For instance, sweeping streets twice a year so that the debris, the dirt, gravel doesn't get in the catch basin and clogs the pipes. There are catch basins that have to be cleaned, vacuumed out once a year. There are all these requirements, checking and labeling all your catch basins, all your culverts, and head walls, and making sure and evaluating them at what condition they're in. And like many communities, out of sight, out of mind. These pipes for drainage are all underground. You don't really see them. You only see them when you have a heavy rain. All of a sudden you say, boy, there's a flood on that street.
Yeah.
It's not draining properly. But you always pass it and put the money somewhere else, because eventually over a few days or a week it drains and you're fine again. Well, that's money we could really use. So this ARPA money's allowed us. We've got a couple of major projects. We have a culvert that actually is on North Westfield Street, called an area called May Hollow, where 3 or 4 years ago the DOT came in. Fortunately, we're very, very lucky to have them come in and support us, and it was about a $600,000 project. It was a temporary fix, but they came in and shored that up for us. But it was a temporary fix. So what I'm going to do with some of this ARPA money that's coming is go in there and fix it right, to redo the road, redo the culvert. And what a culvert is the pipes that go under the road that help the streams and the rivers flow. Those get blocked up, it just ruins the structure, ruins the road. A very serious safety issue. So we have a couple of main issues with that. One's on North Westfield Street, the other one is on North Street, called Deep Gutter, the same thing. That culvert, that pipe is original, and the bank's caving in, the pipes corroded. That's another area. We have 2 areas in town that the kids actually kayak in the street when it's a heavy rain, because the storm drains, the drainage system isn't working. So we need to dig up that whole street. That's a $1.2, $1.5 million project for each. One's on Meadow Street, one's on Leland Terrace. So those are major issues. Those are millions of dollars that we just didn't, we can't budget for those types of projects because there's too many of them. So those are some of the main things, but the infrastructure needs, the roads, the sidewalks, those are things we're looking to do with a lot of that money.
You said something interesting that I don't think a lot of people understand, and a lot of times I have to pick up the phone and call my friends in local government to kind of give me the nutshell version of it, if you will. How does the budget work in, I guess, speak to Agawam, because I know that each community is a little bit different. Some have a strong mayor, some have a weak mayor form of government, some have stronger councils, some have weaker councils. But, one of the first mistakes I made when I was elected state representative is that I assumed that the budget process in the state, the local government, and the federal government was essentially identical. And nothing could be further from the truth. A lot of similarities, conceptually anyway, but take the viewers, if you will, through kind of the budget process at a municipal level. Just kind of this is how it happens, this is how you go from, hey, this is how we're going to fund the government for the next fiscal year, to the actual finished product.
It's really interesting. We have department heads, and the department heads do their cost centers, if you will. In other words, the DPW sets up the DPW budget, which is salaries, equipment, backhoes, dump trucks, pickups, all those different things that are necessary, so materials, sand, salt for winter plowing and things of that nature. The police department does their deal with cruisers and with staffing and overtime and whatnot. Fire.
When does that process begin?
That process begins somewhere in November or December of the previous year, and we start the process then. I will be presenting a budget in May to our city council. In the meantime, we look at a lot of things. We look at our growth. What growth means is how much money we have coming into our community based on taxes that people are paying, Chapter 70 money from the schools, Chapter 90 money for streets,
roads,
which we get about $1 million, just shy of $1 million. You take all your revenues that come in. And that's the challenging part. And that's where we're getting caught now, because the pandemic happened, it started 2 years ago or thereabouts. And things of that nature don't impact you for a year or two to come. We're in the process now where we're getting hit with expenses that we weren't anticipating.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of knew it was coming, but now the other shoe is falling. For instance, let me give you a quick one. Very simple for people to understand. Healthcare. During the pandemic the last 2 years, if you had knee surgery, hip surgery, shoulder surgery, what they refer to as elective surgeries in many cases, those were, number one, in many cases, canceled by the hospitals. Where they weren't canceled by the hospital, when they did allow them before and kind of after it slowed down, now individuals didn't want to really go into hospitals with everything that was going on, and they were going to wait. Well, guess what? Now that we're really getting to the other side of it, everybody's signing up for these elective surgeries. So what do you think the insurance companies do? Where do you think those extra costs are going to? Because they base your rates on your claims. So our claims were down, and they did, in fairness to them, they did give us somewhat of a reduction, not a lot, but a little bit. Yeah. But now the increase, for instance, for Agawam is going to be somewhere around 12% increase in healthcare.
Wow.
Now Agawam, for all our employees, we take care of 70% of that, and they take care of 30%. So their cost is going to go up to 30% they cover, but my cost as the mayor is going to go really high. Those are some of the things that happen. The cost of us doing business. Just think about you putting gas in your car.
Of course.
Think about a community having to put gas in their cruisers, their fire engines, their dump trucks, their backhoes. Yeah. That cost, that's going through the roof. So those costs went up for us. And everybody says, well, we don't want you raising taxes, but we want this, we want this, we want that. We had businesses go out. You think about meals tax. That's a part of our growth. That's an income we have.
Yeah.
We base our taxes on, okay, if we have a good year with the meals tax and the excise tax, then that's less we have to get from the residents in the form of taxes, their home taxes. So in the last couple of years, think about it. Six Flags, do you think they were open during the pandemic? Do you know how much they bring in meals taxes that we didn't get? Chez Joseph, a huge banquet hall that was closed down. What do you do? Where does that revenue come from? But people don't think of that. So there are a lot of hits we took. We lost some businesses, not a lot, fortunately, but we lost some businesses. Some of the big businesses, the revenue that they usually bring in didn't come. So we base our taxes on that. I laughed last year because I actually lowered the taxes by like 90 cents per thousand, residential taxes. But everybody said, you killed me. My tax bill went up. It went up because their assessed value of their property went up 12%. We all know there were bidding wars on homes. If you were asking $350, you probably got $400 for your home. So the value of your home went up, which is a good thing. But if your value goes up, guess what? The tax on that piece of property now that's worth $400,000 instead of $350. So your tax bill went up, but actually your tax rate went down, but people don't see it that way.
Well, that's why I asked the question. I mean, we speak very abstractly about budgets and things like that, but the actual process, I think, is lost on a lot of people. And like I said, when I first got into government, lost on me. I certainly had my homework to do. So department heads come in, they put forth their proposal. Mm-hmm. And then you what does that look like?
Well, I look at our revenues, what we have coming in. We look at what our anticipated growth is for the following year. And particularly this year, we're looking at a growth that isn't as high as it has been in the past because businesses were hurting. Yeah. Excise tax, nobody's buying new vehicles. Yeah. We had something like $4 million come in excise tax. Well, we're going to be lucky if we get 3.2. So where's that other 800,000 going to come from? So we got to figure that out. You also figure cost of living increases. We're in the middle of negotiating with 14 unions this year. They're all going to get a cost of living increase, a wage hike. Where's that money coming from? Doing business, materials and supplies have gone up exponentially. We talked about the energy costs, not just fuel,
Yeah.
but electric, gas, those prices going through the roof. We have municipal buildings. We have to pay for those utilities for it. Where's that money coming from? So we have the department heads come in. They bring in their budget. I look at it and say, okay, can you do without, instead of 4 cruisers, can you do with 3? Instead of 2 dump trucks this year, can you do with 1? You had a couple of employees last year that we didn't fill. Can we maybe go another year without filling those 2 spots? So you're looking everywhere you can to try to reduce your costs so that you don't have to raise taxes on the residents who are also hurting because, their wages maybe didn't go up that much, but certainly their costs of doing business did. Their gas bill, their electric bill,
Grocery store. Yeah.
grocery stores going crazy. So it's not easy. But we sit down with the department heads. They go back and forth with of course, the bigger departments like the DPW, police, fire have more they can give from their budgets than the clerk or the assessor. And so we look at it. We look for a bottom line that'll meet our anticipated tax rate that we want to hold, and what we can afford. And it's a lot of it's a guessing game, but it's based on some pretty hard data, so we're going to be pretty accurate. And then the council gets it, and they look at it, and they say, well, geez, I think it's going to be a little high. We don't want taxes to go up a lot. Can you cut anything else? And I share with them what the cuts we're making, and I deliver the budget with my department heads in front of the council. And so we have a lot of give and take, which is wonderful. I welcome that.
Yeah.
And they ask good, hard questions, but they also are sympathetic to what we are doing. And but they want to be fiscal responsible, as I do, and the department heads do. But this is going to be a difficult, real challenging year because we're seeing the end result of the 2 years of the pandemic.
A lot of people. I don't. One of the things that we're intimately aware of in government is that this COVID wasn't okay, I'm just going to come through, have an impact, and then move on. Some of the most difficult impacts are going to manifest themselves in the months and in years to come. The role of the council in that process, that back and forth, what authority do they have? Can they cut? What can they do? And I'm hoping that, because and I'm asking this for a reason. I want the viewers to know that process versus our process when the governor kind of sends something, when the governor makes a budget recommendation.
Yes, they absolutely can cut, and in some cases do. If you can't defend what you're doing in a certain department or budget, they're going to ask you why the rates are going up. We have to explain exactly why the health rates are going up. One of the things that people don't understand, Agawam is a very fortunate community. We do not have trash fees. We do not have kindergarten fees. There's a lot of fees Agawam does not have that other communities do. But we all know what's happening with trash rates, and the landfill's filling up, and so now it's raising the cost per tonnage every year. It's going up. And we don't have a trash fee at this point. We don't have a stormwater fee. They're very fortunate because that's a form of a tax as well, but most communities do have those. So those things impact your budget as well. We got to come up with that money somewhere.
Revenue's not coming. You're not printing the money. It's coming from somewhere.
Exactly.
It's coming. Okay. It's coming from somewhere for sure. So, I guess, and again, for the reason I asked that rhetorical question for me anyway, was that at the state level and even at the national level, you look at it. So from where we are in the state budget is that Governor Baker in January comes out with what we refer to as House 1, which is confusing because it really has nothing to do with the House. It's the governor's recommendation of the budget in January. He put that forward. The House of Representatives is getting ready to release their budget on Wednesday. They'll have their budget debate next week. And then in May, the Senate, we will take up our budget. And really what's interesting about this process is, whereas at the local level, the mayor, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's your budget, correct me if I'm wrong, with input from the council. Whereas with us, it's the governor makes a recommendation. And in many instances, the legislature then looks at it, uses it as a guiding principle, but then creates their entirely separate document the budget. We pass our budgets, vote on them. There's always differences. There'll be a conference committee, and then we'll send it to the governor for his signature. So in many respects, the governor is really just sending us an abstract document that we can, for all intents and purposes, if we wanted to, we could say, nah, we're not interested. The process has to happen, but we're not interested in your budget at all. We're going to do our own. And I think a lot of people, and maybe I'm assuming this and it's not accurate, but I didn't know about the differences of the different levels. And a lot of times people will say to me, hey, how does the state do it? How does the local government? How does the Congress do it at the national level? So I just wanted to kind of give viewers that local perspective, because we talk about these, the budget, taxes, and a lot of times we leave it there. We don't dive into the actual decision making. And, you can't print revenue. You can't just say, hey, we're going to have this much more money. A lot of times, if you want things, you got to pay for it. And it's a difficult conversation that I will frequently have with constituents and obviously you as well. We are wrapping down here, but I just want to quickly touch on this because we just discussed it. And it's more of a state thing. We just had this conversation. So obviously Agawam is home to one of the two state's veteran cemeteries. And in Agawam, we have a problem potentially in that we could run out of space in the not too distant future for veterans to be buried there. And one of the things that we are beginning the conversation with, we started it today. I should say last week, something that I mentioned to Governor Baker. I mentioned it to Secretary Poppy with you at the Wreaths to Remember event at the cemetery. And then we just talked to the governor's Western Mass director. The land right now, there's some, just to kind of give people what's going on here, there's some land that's available. And I think it makes all the sense in the world to begin those conversations about the state coming and buying them so we can ensure, the worst situation we'd be in is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, veterans are passing away who are entitled to be buried there and there's no place for them to go. But the concern is that, well, if there's land available, we have to strike when the iron's hot, or it may not be available, and then we're going to be stuck. So I really kind of brought that up more as we are talking about that. It's an important topic. Agawam, like many of the communities I represent, is a very patriotic community. So we'll obviously do what we need to do to continue those conversations. Mayor, I want to thank you for coming on today. But more importantly, I want to thank you for your partnership. This government thing doesn't work unless, the local officials are talking to the state, talking to the federal. And I would suggest that we've got a good thing going in that back and forth. And I appreciate your time here. And needless to say, as we go forward, I'm going to be asking you to come back if you'd be willing to. Absolutely. And thank you for inviting me. I think people can tell by watching this tape that you and I are in sync. Absolutely. You're aware of our concerns and needs. You've been in discussions with me, and that's what somebody in your position should be doing, reaching out to the community, and you do it better than anybody I know. So thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, and thank you to the school, thank you to the students, Kenny, Pete, Les, everybody. It's a great thing that you're doing here. So thank you very much. Signing off until next month.